26 degrees. Up towards the north, though, you're very sunny conditions all the way from Cuba, Jamaica, as well as the Dominican Republic. Now, over towards Europe, that's a whole nother story. There is only one location I can tell you that's going to be having great weather on Saturday, and that is going to be for parts of Portugal as well as Spain with sunny conditions in the mid-20s.
Qatar Airways, world's 5-star airline.
People talk about televising the revolution. It's tweeting the revolution, Facebooking the revolution, videotaping the revolution.
A new world driven by new media.
This is a very peculiar moment in media history.
Nobody can force me in 2011 to watch whatever I don't want to watch.
Analyzing the media's role in shaping modern history. The Listening Post, at this time on Al Jazeera.
Welcome back. The top story on Al Jazeera, the crisis in Libya. Muammar Gaddafi has given a surprise address in Tripoli's Green Square following another day of violence in Libya. The defiant leader told a crowd of supporters he was prepared to arm his people to defeat the enemy. In another part of the capital, militia loyal to the Libyan leader have fired on pro-democracy protesters. A draft UN Security Council resolution says the violence in the country may amount to crimes against humanity. It's calling for an investigation by the International Criminal Court in The Hague. And the US chartered ferry carrying hundreds of foreigners who were trying to flee the violence in Libya has finally arrived in Malta. It was scheduled to leave at Tripoli on Wednesday, but had been delayed because of rough weather. Cal Perry has more from the capital, Valletta.
The first ship from the American flotilla has arrived here in the port of Malta. Now 300 passengers in total, just roughly over half are American citizens. The concern here on the ground is becoming one of the medical needs for the people on this ship. They were in that port of Tripoli for 48 hours locked in that ship, and then an 8-hour voyage dealing with very high seas. The hospital here is on high alert, expecting an influx of patients. They say they are ready to treat those patients. Motorcycle police standing by, ready to rush folks to that hospital. Now, in many ways, this is a watershed moment for the U.S. administration because, of course, getting their citizens out now allows them to be able to turn to a military potential aspect of this story. No government wanted to really commit or start talking about military intervention until their citizens were officially out of Libya.
One of Gaddafi's sons, Saif al-Islam, says he hopes to negotiate a ceasefire by Saturday. Speaking to reporters in Tripoli, he claims security forces were told to hold back on fighting to give peace a chance. But earlier on Friday, Turkish television aired a recorded interview with Saif, where he promised to defeat those behind the uprising.
We don't destroy the oil. The oil is for the Libyans. We don't kill our people because of our people. But we will never, ever let our people walk alone in this dark time. Never, ever. We are now united, all of us, and we will fight to the end. And we will get rid of those terrorists.
David Owen is Britain's former foreign minister and now a member of the House of Lords. He says sanctions will not help the people in Libya.
We can't put troops on the ground into a civil war. In a civil war, that fighting, unfortunately, has to take place amongst the citizens of that country. That is happening now as we listen. All we can do is to try and help those people who are taking up arms, this is their right, and also protest at their government. We can help them not being attacked from the air by those forces. That's a significant and important humanitarian decision, and that's certainly within the power of the Security Council to do. But, you know, sanctions on Gaddafi's assets and that of his sons, and no flying arrangements, and economic sanctions. I mean, what economic sanctions against Libya would affect the citizens of Libya, the very people we want to try and help in this chaos? Now, it's an important thing to do because it demonstrates that we are concerned, but that is not the immediate issue.
Now let's move to developments in Iraq. And Al Jazeera has obtained pictures of what appears to be police firing on protesters in the Iraqi city of Fallujah. Demonstrations against corruption and a lack of basic services have turned deadly in the country. At least 12 people have been killed in anti-government rallies across Iraq. Tarek Bazley reports.
The spirit of protest very much alive in Iraq. Despite the capital in virtual security lockdown, thousands took to the streets. Their day of rage inspired by recent events in North Africa.
Our demands is the following. First, prevent corruption by making laws to prevent that and apply it correctly for the favourite of the Iraqi people.
Soldiers searched protesters trying to enter Liberation Square. They barricaded a bridge leading to the city's so-called green zone government area. At one point, protesters threw stones at riot police, who forced them back against the wall. In the southern city Basra, around 3,000 also took to the streets to protest against corruption and a lack of basic services. Concrete slabs surrounding the Basra government building were knocked over. Clashes too with riot police in Mosul, where provincial government offices were set on fire. 8 years after the US-led invasion and the fall of Saddam Hussein, there's clear anger on the streets. Development has been slow to come to the country, and after recent events in the region, there are fears that anger could drive a broader call for change. Tarek Bazley, AlJazeera.
At least 19 people in Yemen have been wounded after security forces opened fire on pro-democracy demonstrators in Aden in the south. Tens of thousands of people also took to the streets in the capital and other parts of the country. Demonstrators who've been staging rallies for weeks are calling for the immediate resignation of President Saleh. Thousands of protesters have taken to the streets of Jordan as well on Friday, demanding political and economic reforms. Around 5,000 people are holding a rally in the capital Amman amid a strong police presence. They're calling for constitutional changes. In particular, they want a limit on the powers of the monarch, King Abdullah. The government has recently introduced financial and political concessions to prevent a spillover of anti-government protests in neighboring countries. Officials say Bahrain's King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa has sacked 3 ministers who caused crisis after the latest unrest. Earlier, tens of thousands of protesters gathered in Manama's Pearl Square after Friday prayers. They carried flags and chanted slogans calling for unity between Sunni and Shia. They also demanded that the king and his government step down. Friday has been declared a national day of mourning, a week after 7 people were killed in clashes with security forces. And in Tunisia, thousands have also filled the streets in central Tunis in a day of rage against Muammar Gaddafi and his crackdown on Libyans. They also called for the resignation of former loyalists from Tunisia's interim government, including the caretaker Prime Minister Mohamed Ghannouchi. This is Al Jazeera, and these are the stories making headlines. A defiant Muammar Gaddafi has appeared before his supporters in Tripoli's Green Square, promising to fight till the end. The Libyan leader made it clear that he had no intention of stepping down.
And when necessary, weapons depot will be opened for all the Libyans to be armed. All the tribe will be armed, so Libya will turn into a burning hell. I've come here to salute you, salute your courage, and tell you to reply to them. I'm here among the people, among the masses.
In another part of the capital, militia loyal to the Libyan leader have fired on pro-democracy protesters. Tripoli is Gaddafi's last stronghold. Security forces are fighting to win back control of Zawiya, just outside the capital.
Please, United Nations, save Libya. No to bloodshed, no to killing of innocents. We want a decisive, a rapid and a courageous resolution from you.
And a U.S. chartered ferry carrying hundreds of foreigners who are trying to flee the violence in Libya has finally arrived in Malta. It was scheduled to leave Tripoli on Wednesday, but had been delayed because of rough weather. In Iraq, several protesters have died in clashes with security forces during a day of rage. People have been demonstrating over a lack of food, water, electricity and jobs. Basra's governor has already resigned in response to the protests. At least 19 people in Yemen have been wounded after security forces opened fire on pro-democracy demonstrators in Aden in the south. Tens of thousands of people also took to the streets in the capital and other parts of the country. Demonstrators, who've been staging rallies for weeks, are calling for the immediate resignation of President Saleh. Rescue teams are continuing their search for earthquake survivors in New Zealand after shocks and rain are hampering the operation. 113 people are known to have died, but some 200 are still missing. Hopes are fading of finding any more survivors. Irish voters have been casting their ballots in parliamentary elections in the country's first election since it got a $113 billion financial bailout in November. The economy is a major issue expected to influence voting patterns. With spiraling unemployment and rising inflation, some analysts say this election could spell the end of the current government. French fashion house Christian Dior has suspended its creative director John Galliano after he was accused of assault. Galliano allegedly made anti-Semitic remarks and slapped a couple at a bar in Paris. Police say he was drunk at the time and detained him temporarily. The British designer has been head of Christian Dior, that's the French fashion house, for 14 years and was set to kick off Paris Fashion Week on Monday. And those are the latest headlines here on Al Jazeera.
Hello, I'm Hazem Seeker. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, our weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, Libya. From international pariah to partner and back again, we look at that country's role in the global economy as oil prices continue to rise. We're at the London School of Economics, where Gaddafi's son once studied and submitted a 400-page report on civil society and human rights. And as the unrest spreads, governments struggle to get their people out. We look at Turkey's relationship with Libya. Well, the world has been doing business with Libya for years, but now as Gaddafi's regime allegedly bombs its own people, was the West right to pour billions of dollars into the oil-rich country? The price of oil is steadily rising as the unrest there continues, hitting stock markets and consumer spending hard. In a speech to Kuwait's parliament, UK Prime Minister David Cameron said countries like Britain were wrong to support oppressive regimes for the sake of stability.
For decades, some have argued that stability required highly controlling regimes and that reform and openness would put stability at risk. So the argument went, countries like Britain faced a choice between our interests and our values. And to be honest, we should